Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the final session prior to the lunch break, and this is a panel discussion on smart mobility. We have the moderator for this session, Mr. Vinay Shenoy. Mr. Vinay Shenoy, the Managing Director at Infineon Technologies India. Now, this particular panel discussion also is a combination of virtual and physical mode. Mr. Vinay Shenoy has over 20 years of knowledge semiconductors, consumer wiring and telecommunications industries. He has worked in several roles with Texas Instruments, Philips Electronics and SEM India. So I would request Mr. Vinay Shenoy to kindly come over. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Vinay Shenoy. I would quickly read out the name of the other panelists with their companies which they represent. Importantly, we have Sri Lior Sethon from Mobileye Intel, who is going to join us on the virtual mode. We have Mr. Sanjay Gupta, NXP Semiconductors, also from the virtual mode. Mr. Uday Dodla from Qualcomm. I would request Mr. Uday to kindly come over. Yeah, he's here. Welcome to you, sir. And also we have Vivek Singhal from Texas Instruments, who's here. Mr. Vivek. Yeah. And finally, we have Mr. Amit Jain from Minda, who's going to join us from virtually. So I would, the dignitaries have joined us on the virtual mode. I would request Mr. Vinay Shenoy to take us through. It's over to you, Mr. Vinay.
Thank you. I just hope that in the next 55 minutes, we make that time worthwhile rather than giving you that extra hour in the morning to sleep on a Sunday morning or going for a stroll in this beautiful Cubbon Park. But we'll try to make it exciting, light-hearted. And we have two virtual participants. Unfortunately, I can see them now, joining us online. But before we get into smart mobility in particular, what I would like to do is to set the broader context of the smart city in which smart mobility is a part, broadly speaking. And at what's driven smart cities globally all over the world, one, with respect to urbanization, population increases, upwardly economically affordable families, traffic has become a nightmare. I mean, I just loved the way it was 2.5 years ago, although for the wrong reasons. Hardly any traffic on the street. But now we are back. And Rajiv Ji was speaking about in his inaugural how familiar Bangalore looks now. Now, what's traffic congestion leading to? One, like Nivriti said, fatalities that we need to avoid. And where do the fatalities come from? Because of traffic congestion to a great extent, anger management is always a challenge for us. There you're sitting in traffic, you're late. I think the most commonly used excuse in our industry, at least IT industry, is, sorry, I'm late, but don't blame me, it's the traffic. Though you may be at home still, not yet in traffic. But this is one part. And second, look at the productivity losses that we have, stuck in traffic for an hour and a half, 2 hours, whether you're sitting in a Wipro bus or an Intel bus or you're driving your own car, it doesn't really matter. You are stuck in traffic for an hour and a half, fatigue by the time you reach office or fatigue by the time you reach home, and an ideal foundation for arguments at home. So, the conventional thought with respect to addressing traffic congestion is very linear. Broaden the roads. Add yet another layer of roads. But all that you're managing to do is to create an induced demand for more people to buy cars, and which eventually will lead to more traffic congestion. So this is where smart mobility comes in. It's a new, not say new anymore, but radical, revolutionary approach to managing mobility, one that focuses on efficiency, for example, like I said. Second, on safety. And three, convenience. Now, the end goals are, of course, it could be zero emissions, zero accidents, or even zero ownership. The first of these, in my view, is the transition to net zero transportation, primarily EV. But today, EV is still not net zero because the source of the power generation that charges your cars is still not renewable in nature. And then that is a transition that we will achieve not very far from now. On efficiency, today when you get into a car at home, your destination is still your car. Now, smart mobility also explores different ways where you can use multimodal transport. Bounce is an example where the last mile connectivity is from a nearest metro station. You can just take a bike so that you don't have to be stuck in traffic, you don't have to find parking spaces, etc. And then, of course, this new realm of opportunities that conventional semiconductor companies or automotive companies, if I may use the word, have not dealt with yet. And this is ride sharing, ride hailing, e-scooters. I don't know how many of you see these, dangerous looking kick scooters, as we call it, right? You start with the kick, or, hover boards or hover scooters. Again, you use the footpaths or the curbs to move around. Again, a new technology. Autonomous vehicles, of course, will come a little later. Subways, street cars, you name it. There are plenty of modes that are evolving today. End of the day, this whole smart mobility aims to offer an end-to-end platform/solution for people to find convenience way, empowered ways to move around. So, coming back to the scope of this panel discussion, technology is a driving factor, for sure. It's not just about ways of living or ways of commuting. Smart mobility essentially requires core technologies such as the ability to gather data through multimodal sensors, whether it's in your vehicle or on the infrastructure, being able to analyze, make sense of the data, and then, of course, finally, to be able to integrate drivers, vehicles, and infrastructures to provide the best smart mobility solutions. And, of course, semiconductors plays a very pivotal role in all of this technology. So we have a very interesting panel here, and let me make a quick introduction. We have Lior Sethon from Mobileye, a darling startup, I think a couple of years ago, continues to be a darling startup, being acquired by Intel for 15 billion, and are now here. Probably the valuations will hit 50 billion when you go public. Nothing like it. Second, Sanjay, again, a colleague from the industry, from NXP, Infineon as well as NXP and TI included, have been delivering automotive solutions to the market for over 2 to 3 decades. So, but we could also say we are transitioning into the new world of automotive from the old world. We have Uday from Qualcomm. Again, new entrant, I would say, though you may disagree, but in our terminology, 2 to 3 decades is normal. Where you bring in communication, which is so critical to enable smart mobility, autonomous driving, or any other value-added services, which we call as mobility services. So I think you're right in the midst there, probably making more money than all of us put together. And then you have Vivek, also familiar face when we go to customers, sitting in the lobby area, trying to sell the same products or similar products to the customers. And Kashyap, are you on? Did Kashyap join? Okay, Amit. Sorry, Medha. A long-term player in locomotives, electrification of drives, and now also venturing into electric drivetrain for commercial vehicles and heavy vehicles. Kind of a tier 1 for the locomotive industry, or even OEM for heavy commercial vehicles. And the last, we have a Indian tier 1 serving the automotive OEMs, Minda. Yeah, from Minda, I'm sorry. Very interesting panel, and we'll have probably about 30-35 minutes before I launch over to you guys to ask questions to this interesting panel, and I'll make it a little tougher on them too. So let's begin with the Lior. The smart mobility is a nice keyword. It's like AI. I studied AI in 1991, but that was only in books. Before it became a reality, probably it took us another 2.5, 3 decades because the basic technology available to launch AI applications was not available. So where would you stay is smart mobility at this point in time? You need plenty of infrastructure technologies, communication, sensors, power, road infrastructure, curbside infrastructure, in-vehicle infrastructure. So where are we today with respect to smart mobility? Is it still a buzzword whose time has not come yet? Or are we ready and getting there very soon? Lior, question to you. And of course, the others of you can also jump in because it's a generic question.
So I hope you hear me. You hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for having me here. My pleasure to be here. Best regards from Jerusalem, Israel, to everybody. So coming back to your question, the reality is already here. The fact that you have software with very strong chips and compute power in the vehicle and AI technology already embedded or can be retrofitted on vehicles brings a lot of new opportunities. And the reality, as you started to mention about smart mobility and sensors that are providing real-time or almost in real-time information, it's there. We are there. If I can add a few words about Mobileye, we are the world leaders in avoiding collision technology, which is based in the last 20 years on vision sensing, machine learning, and usage of AI. In the last years, we are also one of the leaders in putting autonomous vehicles on the road, which is a very complicated and task that involved a lot of complicated challenges when it comes to software and hardware and regulations and algorithms from all kinds and redundancy of sensors for safety. But we are coming from vision sensing. So also today our ADAS system, including in India, are able to extract a lot of data and give and provide information not only for the autonomous vehicles, also to decision maker, road planners, public transportation authorities, infrastructure companies, road operators, about the traffic situation, about obstacles on the road, about the infrastructure status, such as position of new poles, potholes on the road, position of traffic signs, and their status, position of poles of all kinds, and a lot of information. We are today extracting something like 30 different type of object in real time. And of course, the technology is, we have started to implement that in the last years, but we are developing and changing the technology all the time. And we have also the ability to update the sensors, the moving sensors that we have on the vehicle constantly. So we are uploading in a lot of new information and also to adopt the software to the geolocation landscape. I mean, when you drive in the roads of Munich, or you drive in the roads of Tel Aviv, or you drive in the roads of Bangalore, it's not the same infrastructure that you see there. And we can understand all of them and to do localization of the road understanding and the traffic understanding constantly.
Thank you. Though I would like to, Lior, challenge you to get your Mobileye technology on this famous ring road we call in Bangalore, which houses probably 100,000 IT engineers, including Intel. It would be nice to see you drive past Intel autonomously, and we look forward to that sometime very soon. Coming back to Qualcomm, because again, disruptive. What infrastructure, I mean, you guys are working on a large part of the infrastructure besides more. Where do you see as Qualcomm the basic infrastructure getting ready for smart mobility, autonomous, electrification, you name it. It's all V2V communications, V2 infrastructure, infrastructure to V.
Thanks, Vinay, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us at the show. Well, Vinay called us new kids on the block. It's been 20 years since we've been in automotive. 2002, just a little historical fact, was when Qualcomm launched its first telematic solution for GM's General Motors OnStar system using CDMA. So 20 years is a long time for us to hone the skill and be in this industry. And ever since then, we've continued investing, bringing new technologies to life, such as cockpits, cockpit domain controllers, ADAS very recently. But specifically for smart mobility, 3 years ago, we launched our CV2X platforms, cellular V2X. And that has evolved, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Now, stepping back, for Qualcomm, smart mobility encompasses both the vehicle and the infrastructure. Smart and connected vehicles are the key to smart mobility. They come first. They create broad adoption and then pull the infrastructure along. They act as a catalyst. Vehicles nowadays, and those that launch going forward, are inherently intelligent in nature. Like the previous speakers have said, they have a lot of AI, they have a lot of ADAS systems, domain controllers, which are very, very powerful, are capable of making split-second decisions. And they are the ones that will essentially start pulling and acting as a catalyst for smart infrastructure. Now, smart infrastructure, on the other hand, is, I'd say, a little bit more challenging. It requires a lot of interventions, especially at the city, state, and the national level. The technology is there. It's alive, it's real, it's working. But the adoption of that and rollout has been lagging in the industry. In fact, it's a billion-dollar question. So instead of addressing it at a wholesale level, if we start implementing this in bite-sized chunks, we can actually see smart mobility come to life. And that's where the key is. Qualcomm has conducted several trials, real-world trials in San Diego, Denver, Atlanta. Japan has had its own smart mobility system for several years now. Europe is rolling out smart mobility solutions. But I believe in India, we will see this come to life in the very near future. We are working with almost all the major OEMs to bring the CV2X, specifically CV2X, to life. So we don't think it's that far away. It just takes a little bit of conviction on everyone's part to make this a possibility.
The next question, Amit, to you and also Sanjay. Traditionally, we are a hardware-oriented industry, automotive in particular, whether you're in tier 1 or even as a tier 2 or semicon company. We have been in the business of making semiconductors or integrating them into another hardware solution. Now, increasingly in smart mobility, you begin to see software and services playing a very, very prominent role going forward. And probably semiconductors will dwarf in comparison with the revenue and the value of services that are on top of the semiconductor solutions. So how are companies like yours transitioning? How do you look at this? Although in a semicon company, of course, we still have a significant number of software into our semiconductors, but I think the scale of software and services is on a magnitude probably 100x going into the future. So how are semiconductor companies and traditional automotive companies responding to this transition? And what do you see as major challenges? Question to Amit. Sorry, Amit, I missed you when I introduced the virtual participants. And Sanjay, either of you can take this question or both.
Sure. You want to go first, Sanjay?
Sure. Let me take a dive on that first, and then I will hand over to you. So, good afternoon, everyone. I had to come back to Delhi last night because of some personal reasons, but I had wonderful first 2 days. So a great conference and a great thought leadership. Kudos goes to all the organizers for such a wonderful show together. To come back to your question, I think that as our previous speakers said, we are in an era where it is literally computers on wheel. That is going to drive the future mobility. Now the wheels could be flying wheels like a drone, or it could be a wheels for a car, right? We keep talking about 75 billion plus devices, connected devices. That is going to be the future in next few years, and all these devices are going to be the symbol and the signal for this smart mobile world that we are all trying to conceive and innovate. So in this world, needless to say that hardware and software go hand in hand. What cannot be done in a hardware has to be done in software, especially when you talk about cars as an example, with a 10 to 15 years of lifetime. You can't expect to take the car back to the garage and take the entire hardware change to incorporate the latest and greatest features which are coming in. So truly like a mobile phone, we have these software upgrades that happen without the users need to worry about any compatibility issue or anything to do with the security. I think exactly same is going to happen with the future mobile devices and automobiles, where on-the-air update is going to be the norm, and this is something that all semiconductor companies, including ours, are designing towards. And once you expose your cars to on-the-go updates, one thing that goes without saying is they have to be 100% secure, right? Otherwise, as was signaled in one of the lab-based, benign hackers a few years back, that you can control everything inside your car by getting through the open channels. I think in that specific example, they entered into this GM vehicle via infotainment channel, and then entered into the entire braking system and steering systems, and potentially it can kill someone if somebody wants, right? So that was a wake-up call for the whole industry, that any smart system cannot be a secure and cannot be a future compatible if the security is not there, and that's where a key link remains to make this system seamless mobile. So that's what I would say. I will leave it to Amit for the next response, but we'll discuss more on that.
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay, and thanks, team. So I think from my perspective, I'm going to speak more from an automotive tier one perspective. I come from Minda. Minda is a 65-year-old purely automotive tier one company. We do everything from seat belts and airbags all the way, up to ADAS, infotainment, and electrification, products. For us, smart mobility is synonymous to sustainable mobility. And everything, when we speak of smart mobility, we need to look at how sustainable that is in the long run. In the automotive scenario, the life cycle of developing, car is typically 3 to 4 years, and it needs to be on the road for the next 10 years. So you're looking at making hardware decisions like today for the next 15 years. And speaking about how these technologies are getting integrated in the next set of vehicles and making sure that they remain relevant with either over-the-air air updates, or making sure that the features for the next generation of smart mobility are more or less like package protected for what's going to come in the future. Yeah. And one of the key issues, again, in these areas when we speak about India as a country is definitely affordability. India's got airbags 25 years after it was mandatory in most parts of the world, something that's so critical to just safety. And we made airbags mandatory, the front airbags mandatory just recently. So there's a lot of affordability, and unless there is a regulatory framework around a lot of these, we believe that adoption of many of these would actually continue to be on paper. So the way we're tackling this, this situation is making sure that we work closely with policymakers, with organizations that set standards and the regulatory framework to more or less ensure that some of these really get embedded into regulation and homologation, and in order to ensure that these things are more or less forced on when we actually design the vehicles rather than an afterthought. And obviously, we also continue to work with other ecosystem and infrastructure companies, because at the end of the day, all this is not going to work unless there's the right infra in place. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. My next question is to Vivek and Lior. The automotive industry, I shouldn't say notorious, but has not been very embracing when it comes to standards. Now, when I look at my car, the only thing that I can buy off the shelf from anywhere is the battery. Even there, my automotive OEM says, you should not use this battery, you should use the one that I recommend. Number two, the tire, not even the rim. Amazing. And three, the horn, right? What else? I can't think of anything else that can be used across cars as a default. Now, it's an industry that has not embraced standards very much across. And now you bring in a new dimension of these mobility services, which are probably another 6-10 layers of software and other technologies on top. And the only way to make smart mobility successful is through standards. So where do you think are the standards heading? I mean, I'm sure, Lior, for Mobileye technology to work, unless you start customizing it for every car, you start customizing it for every street in every city, in every country, I think it's going to be a humongous effort. So I would imagine for you to scale up, you'd also require a multitude of standards to be in place so that cars work seamlessly even across Europe, which is not necessarily known to be a very homologous continent. So Vivek, first to you, role of standards in making smart mobility successful and scale, and then Lior, your turn too.
Sure. I'll probably take a little longer to get to this question. Maybe also try to explain this whole question around standards, very important. How is it really complex? It's not just standardization of a communication infrastructure, standardization within vehicle, but it's a much, much, much larger problem, and I think we're just scratching the surface. But before I get there, maybe just to share my view on why smart mobility, what is needed so we can comprehend what is the scale at which we are looking at it. Consider this. It is happening every second. Somewhere, somehow, someone is getting injured in a road crash. Cars are lining up not just at Marathali, across the world, various cities. Traffic is piling up. Ambulances and police vehicles are struggling to make their way through the traffic to reach the spots. And all the cars that are stuck in traffic, drivers sitting in there are getting frustrated. Even worse, by the time I started speaking about it, someone probably lost their life in a road crash. There are countries spending up to 3% of their GDP to tackle costs due to road crashes. We are spending countless hours. If you go by statistics, it's up to 15% of our working hours are being spent stuck in traffic. That's a huge number. And I believe in 2019, the CO2 emissions caused by passenger cars were around 3 billion metric tons, which is around 10% of the global CO2 emission. So clearly, smart mobility, the way I see it, has to make things safer, has to make mobility safer, has to make it cheaper, has to make it faster. We want to commute fast. Has to make it more comfortable. I heard Vivek talk about getting a back massage while stuck in traffic jam. So making it comfortable and absolutely greener. And it's not just vehicles. We also learned that semiconductor content in a vehicle is growing from 5% to 20%. We are finding use cases, we are solving problems which are not standardized. We are still trying to figure out how to solve problems. But it starts from infrastructure. We are talking about smart traffic signals, where we have sensors that can not just detect, it can predict and prevent traffic jams. It can reroute traffic. We are talking about smart parking spaces where you have radar sensors equipped which can find open spaces and guide incoming vehicles to open spaces, probably even pre-book the parking spaces by the time the cars are arriving. With electrification of vehicles, we need smarter infrastructure. Think of the buses. We want electric buses, but then how do we ensure that they always remain charged? So we are talking about bus stops where you are able to have faster and quick charging of EV vehicles, EV buses. So coming back to your point is I still believe the whole smart mobility paradigm, while there are certain places where we are talking about ADAS systems, which is, I would say, probably still a step ahead. We have a much, much, much larger, broader problem. And the standardization, I would say, is still evolving. And now think about, you have these smart traffic signals, you have smart parking lots, you have smart vehicles, you have smart parking stations. All of this needs to be interconnected through smarter connectivity solutions. And we have to build not just one smart vehicle, we have to build a huge smart ecosystem. So we have standardization at certain individual places, but to me the biggest challenge would be how do we think of it as a big ecosystem and drive standardization across.
Thank you.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.